intense. All right, I think we are live now. Hey, everybody. Welcome. I am CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Berardelli. Welcome to Wildfires and Wild Weather, the effects of climate change in the West. You know, right now is the perfect time to be discussing wild weather because we have a record-breaking storm that's going to be forming over the next couple of days just west of Seattle, the equivalent of a Category 3 hurricane. That's how strong this is going to be. And an intense atmospheric river, a 5 out of 5 on the scale, which is going to be pounding the Pacific coast, especially in central California, Sunday into Monday, could actually turn out to be a dangerous event. What's interesting here is we're going from wildfire, to flood, all kind of in the snap of a finger. We call that climate or weather whiplash. And research shows that weather whiplash is increasing because of human-caused climate change, because there's more energy in the system. And the reason why there's more energy in the system, as we all know, is because humans are burning fossil fuels, releasing greenhouse gases, warming the climate, and all that energy is going into extreme weather. The IPCC report that came out this summer said that human-caused climate change is unequivocal. Over the past week, 2 papers came out showing that the agreement between scientists that humans are causing climate change is between 98 and 100%. So climate scientists say, and they all agree, 98 to 100% of them, that climate change is being caused by humans. So we have a great panel lined up for you today. Our best meteorologists across the CBS network are joining us to talk about extreme weather and to talk about this atmospheric river that's going to be impacting the West Coast as we head into Sunday and Monday. So let me introduce our panel today. KCAL Los Angeles meteorologist Amber Lee.
Hi, Amber. How are you? Am I supposed to introduce?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Very good. We have CBS 4 Denver meteorologist Dave Aguilera. Dave.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Amber. Thanks for letting me join you guys today. This is going to be awesome, I think.
We are glad to have you. CBS 13 meteorologist Julie Watts from Sacramento.
Hi, guys.
And KPIX San Francisco meteorologist Darren Peck. How are you, Darren?
Great, and hello from soon to be very rainy San Francisco.
Yes, and we're going to start with fires, but I want to promise everyone we are going to be talking about the atmospheric river because this is going to be somewhat of a historic event. I mean, you guys have seen the data, right? This is a 940-ish millibar low. I know that's meteorological, but that is equivalent to a Cat 3 hurricane sitting off the coast west of Seattle. So this is the strongest storm, historically speaking, at least from the records that we have available to us, that we have seen in that area. So we're going to get back to the atmospheric river, but I want to start with wildfires. 9 out of the 10 biggest wildfires in California modern history, have occurred in the past 10 years. The August complex fire last year was over 1 million acres. That was the largest fire. This year, the Dixie fire is almost the largest fire. It's just under 1 million acres. So I want to start with Julie and Darren. I want to ask you, you're in those areas. You've seen the climate change. How have you seen the climate changing in Central California?
Darren, I'll defer to you.
Julie, go ahead.
I'll defer to you to start.
Oh.
He's close to the big fire, right?
I think the fires, Jeff, have been the most attention-grabbing change for anybody living in Northern and even Southern California, particularly over the last 4 years. Not only from the sheer size of them, but from the intensity of them. It's a totally different regime. We've always had wildfires in California, but the scale with which they're burning now is something we've never seen before. And there's a clear pattern of greater intensification, greater acreage burned. Really, the only thing that's saving us this year from getting close to where we were last year is this very fortunate turn in the weather with the unusual amounts of rain we're about to get. And the consequences of living with it, not only for those who are on the front lines of these fires, but what's grabbing everyone's attention throughout the state is the fact that you're waking up in the morning and you're breathing in at times some of the worst air quality on the planet at that time. And I think in terms of bringing this story home to people, that's been one of the most impactful aspects of this on a personal level right out your front door. So it's changed the landscape in unfortunate ways, but it's also raising the awareness with people to a higher degree of things are different now.
Yeah, and jumping off of that, I think, in addition to being a meteorologist, I'm also the station's investigative reporter. And so we kind of do a deep dive into the impact that climate, that fires, that droughts are having on our viewers. And a couple of the things that we noticed just this last fire season, and of course, we were really hit hard this last fire season, the impact on real estate. I mean, California real estate in general is sort of outrageous. But what we're seeing now in some of these burn-scarred regions is real estate prices actually skyrocket in the years following these fires because there's such low inventory. And people who live in these areas want to stay in their communities. In addition to that, as Darren touched on, one of the biggest issues that we face this year, specifically with COVID, or in addition to COVID, is the smoke. So you have kids who in California, the California Department of Public Health recommended keeping doors and windows open. Well, now you've got 400 AQI, you've got kids who have these cloth masks, which we all know don't actually help with particulate matter. And they're sitting inside classrooms all day that are essentially filled with smoke because their windows and doors are open. And so the teachers and these principals and the parents are all in disagreement. Do we keep them open to help prevent COVID, or do we close them so their eyes aren't watering and they're not coughing all day? So it's really those sort of real world implications, in addition to just the tragedy of these fires, the life lost and the property lost. There's just these day-to-day implications that people are dealing with.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to speak to the fact that if there's anybody that's watching that questions that this is happening, the wildfires are kind of a key, if you will, that we are heating up. I've been doing weather in the Rockies since the 80s, and back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the firefighters used to call Colorado the asbestos state, because we had afternoon thunderstorms every day during the summer. We had big snows, and if we got a fire, it was taken care of in just a few days. It was very small. And then once we got to the early 2000s, things changed. We started with that big Hayman fire, which at that time was our largest fire. And ever since then, we've had these big fires. 20 of our largest fires in Colorado have all happened since 2000. So for us here in Colorado, there's no question we're drying out, we're heating up, we're not getting the rain, we're not getting as much snow here.
And last year, you had your three largest fire in 1 year. Your three largest fires. Yeah,
the Cameron Peak, the East Troublesome, and the Pine Gulch, our largest fires ever in 1 year. We had the worst air quality then. Darren was talking a little bit about air quality, worst air quality for a lot of us that we ever had. And then this year, we didn't have as many fires or as many big fires, but we broke the record for bad air quality days in Denver because of all the smoke that was coming from California, Washington, Oregon, all the fires out west. So even if your state is not one of these states that has the fire, you're affected by that. Everybody in the whole country is affected by this wildfire, which is caused by the global climate change that's going on.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys can all attest to with the climate change, temperatures continuously year after year, the last few years get warmer and warmer, and that just prolongs the drought here in the Southland. And that's why we're seeing a lot of that change take place. Here in Southern California, I grew up here, and I don't even remember having the bad air quality because of smoke. I remember having smog alerts. You can't do physical activity, you can't do recess because of that. Now, in my forecast the last couple of years, I've been talking about, the hazardous air quality. And so that's kind of changed the landscape as well, too.
I want to talk about the smoke a little bit more because these are on the ground impacts across the West. It's especially true in places like Sacramento because you're in the valley. A study just came out. It was NPR and Stanford University saying that cities like San Jose have seen a 400% increase in smoke days in the past 10 years. Sacramento now averages 60 days per year where are considered smoke days. And this has really drastic long-term, not just short-term, but long-term impacts on health because these particulates get into your bloodstream. So it's not just lung issues, it's heart issues, it's brain issues, and it's also a danger to pregnant women. So I know, Dave, you talked a little bit about the smoke. Julie, I want to ask you, because it's happening, especially where you are. It's happening everywhere in the West. But I hear stories of people having to put towels, in their windows and, all kinds of crazy stories about how it's affecting them at home.
I think that especially this year, like I said, with COVID, it really has changed things, right? We used to operate differently 2 years ago. Last year, everybody was home. But it's gotten to the point I've noticed this year where people are sort of just saying, you know what, I'm going to risk it because we can't stop life. And also life had been stopped for so long, over the last year. For example, most schools and most like soccer teams and clubs, they will cancel practice when the AQI gets to a certain level. Well, now you have parents saying, we went a whole year without these sports. Our kids are practicing the smoke no matter what, which of course then puts them at grave danger or greater danger of an impact from the smoke. But there's also the mental health issues. So, just like COVID, you see these kids who are now dealing with smoke. And, when we were stuck at home with COVID, and you have these gray days, these apocalyptic looking days, it also adds to the emotional toll that people in the region are dealing with. And then there's just as I mentioned before, what do teachers do? What do principals do? What do schools do when you have to make the choice between keeping doors and windows open for COVID and keeping them closed to keep the smoke out?
What about property? What about your home? What about getting insurance and getting a mortgage on a home? What does that mean for property values going forward? And what about people who don't want to contend with having to worry about a fire breaking out every single year? Climate refugees, essentially, people moving to different parts of the state or moving out of the state. I'm sure you've seen at least some of that happening.
Here in our region, and I think, Darren, you could probably speak to this as well, but, and actually, Amber, you as well, the distinction between us and, say, Southern California and even the Bay Area is, the communities that are being decimated by fires here are not necessarily as affluent as many of the large fires we've seen in Southern California and even the Bay Area, Napa, Oakland fire, that was a long time ago, Oakland Hills fires. So our insurance commissioner did regulate insurance companies cannot cancel insurance in these, high fire risk regions for at least 1 year after a natural disaster is declared. And that generally happens after all the big fires. So people are generally protected for at least a year. And then after that, we have something called the FAIR plan, which is a very high price, sort of low coverage plan of last resort that most of these people in these more rural communities or in these high fire risk zones, it's the only thing they're left with. So it can be difficult to try to sell a house. You do see people in our region leaving because nobody can get insurance and they don't want to deal with it.
And I know in Southern California, there are some insurance companies that won't even offer you insurance because if you live in a high fire prone area, they're like, sorry, there's been too many fires. We're not covering you guys. And so you have to call around to different insurance companies who are willing to give you these home insurances. So, there's that big problem as well.
Yeah. And that's where the FAIR plan comes in, where, like I said, it's a policy of last resort, but unless you're wealthy, you may not be able to afford it. And certainly if your home burns down, you're not going to have enough money out of that plan to rebuild it.
And Julie, did you look into like the opposite of that, flood insurance? So you've got a problem with fire. And then a lot like here, a lot of our communities are along rivers that run through the burn scars. So not only did they have the problem with the fire, but now every time it rains and they only need a little bit of rain, they're under a flood warning. They got flash flooding going on there. So are these people having to get two different insurance policies now that live in those areas?
Oh, and Darren, you could probably speak to this too, because this happens a lot more in the Bay Area than it does up by us, especially with the drought. Our lakes and rivers are pretty low, so flooding has not been an issue. But when it comes to burn scars, that wouldn't necessarily, at least in my experience, be flood insurance because you're looking at debris flows. And so flood insurance is very specific to flood plains and certain areas that have been designated for that require flood insurance, at least in California.
But speaking of that, that's a huge problem with wildfire. It's almost like worse than a blizzard. It's worse than a flooding rainstorm because you not only do you have the danger of the fire, but then you've got 10 to 15 years where flash flooding is a problem. So one fire can lead to 10, 15 years of different weather problems surrounding those areas, right? I know for here, all summer long, almost every day we were worried about having a flash flood at one of the burn scars. We have one in Glenwood Springs, which is right along I-70, which is a major thoroughfare to get to the mountains. And we had several days where the highway was completely shut down. And to get around that, you have to take a 3-hour detour around it to get out of that thing.
Yeah.
And that happened quite a bit during the summer. So this problem is going to continue probably for the next several years, just because of that one fire that was close to the highway.
Right. And, we saw that it was Santa Barbara, right? Just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Amber, did you cover that?
I didn't cover that. I covered, the aftermath because it
Right.
happened early in the morning. So I was on during a day shift. But yeah, that was a fluke. That one, nobody really predicted. We knew that there were burn scars happening. We knew there was going to be rain. We just didn't know how much rain. And we just were inundated with that rain. And those poor people that lived in the area, they had no idea. A lot of them, we talked about being displaced, and a lot of them, they lost loved ones, one family together and then separated, and they couldn't find the family members. So that was just, wow, that was very devastating to cover. I remember we covered that for days, and then roads were washed out, that kind of stuff.
And that's, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead. Continue.
I was going to say that's what we're most concerned about today, frankly, with these storms coming in. We've got major burn scar regions all over. And so, in fact, we had both of our general assignment reporters on 2 different burn scarred regions today, because it's such a big concern for us with this rain. And we got really heavy rain this morning, a lot of it all at once. By the end of Sunday's storm, we are pretty certain there's going to be significant damage, and we're terrified at just how significant it will be.
I wanted to talk about the drought, but since we're talking about the atmospheric river, let's just talk about the atmospheric river. But remind me, we got to get back to the drought, okay? So the storm that's going to develop off Seattle is a monster. I mean, literally the equivalent of a Cat 3 type hurricane in terms of its central pressure. Now, it's going to bring in a band of extremely heavy rainfall, very high concentrations of moisture, almost like a fire hose into central California, on top of what is the worst drought we've seen in modern history going on. So these wild swings, this weather whiplash, is something that we expect of climate change. I think a lot of people might say, I don't understand how is climate change both at the same time causing the worst drought and then the worst flooding? But that is what we expect, because there's more energy in the system. So, let's talk about this atmospheric river. And I want to bring Darren in on this. Darren, this is going to hit you squarely. But there's been, drought conditions, rivers are low, the ground can take a lot of the water. So is it just flooding in burn scar areas that you're worried about, or could this really be a bigger, dangerous flood event?
The main focus for the headline would be the burn scars, but that's so far removed from the experience of most people that it doesn't necessarily, I think, leave an impact on people's consciousness over what's really happening. They might see the pictures on the news, but like the smoke from the wildfires, which comes to their house, this isn't happening to them directly. The concern from this particular atmospheric river would be localized flooding here in the communities of the Bay Area, like low-lying intersections or gutters that haven't been cleaned out. It's going to be enough rain to cause that, but we are so dry on the landscape right now. We could absorb 5 to 6 inches in the local mountains around the Bay Area, and the landscape could still absorb that pretty well before we start seeing major concerns with flooding on rivers. So as intense as this first atmospheric river is, coming on top of the most intense drought in recent record, we're likely not going to notice a lot of significant impact from that regard, because we are playing catch up because of exactly what you mentioned, Jeff, which is the whiplash, which is an important part of this change. Sure, we've always had droughts. Sure, we've always gotten atmospheric rivers, but we're seeing them now go to opposite ends of the spectrum in bigger ways. And I think today is the perfect example of both of them coming together at exactly the same time. Here comes one of the more impressive atmospheric rivers we've ever seen in the month of October here in California, while last week, one of the major stories in our newscast was the most intense drought we've ever seen in California. That's an opportunity, I think, to really help drive home, the nuances and the important distinctions of how this changed climate is going to be behaving. It's the extremes.
And, it's costing us money. 80%, I think, and it was a study a couple of years ago, 80% of the damages from flooding in California occur in atmospheric river events.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of those damages happen in the strongest atmospheric rivers, the 4s and the 5s. It's category 4,
Right.
category 5.
Right.
We should give credit to Scripps for that scale. It's been great quantifying it and kind of explaining it to the public. Now, would the rest of you want to weigh in on? I know, Dave, the atmospheric river is going to kind of jump over you. You're not going to really see too much from that.
Well, yeah. In Denver, we're just going to probably see a few showers and that type of thing. But the big thing that we'll see from this is the snow in the mountains. It's not going to be the biggest snow ever, but this is the time of year that in Colorado our ski resorts are starting to open. We've already had a few open, and we've got more opening this weekend as well. So they're going to get a little snow this weekend, and then from the atmospheric river next week, some areas might see like 6 to 10 inches of snow, which by Colorado standards are pretty small, but for some areas that'll be the biggest that we've seen in a while. And to get the ski resort going, that's a huge part of the economy of Colorado, and with the drought situation, the way it has been, and the lack of moisture, that's one industry that really has a big problem. And Colorado has a lot of outdoor, as does California, I'm sure, and New York as well, but a lot of outdoor activities going on. Skiing is one of them where we need the snow, and we had a good year last year, but many years we have not. The other thing is, we have a special on the Cameron Peak fire coming on our air later today at 6:30. But one of the things they talk about is, and some of the smaller things you don't even think about. So they're going to talk about river rafting. Okay, so the river rafting got up this summer, but the story is a lot of people that went river rafting. You're rafting, you could smell the smoke in the water, and then on days after rain, they were saying you're not rafting on white water, you're rafting on black water.
Yeah.
The water's full of just ash and debris and that type of thing. And as a result, a lot of the rafting industry here in Colorado saw numbers go down as far as people making reservations and that type of thing. And they were doing all kinds of different things to make up the money. But you see that fishing is a big deal. There's not as many fish in the water. The fish are dying. So people that take fly fishing trips and that type of thing, they're not going in the numbers that they used to. Water's a big deal around here. After a rain, some of the cities that are relying upon water from the rivers that go through these burn areas, they have to make different arrangements to get water from different cities when that happens. There's one town here, Greeley. I don't know how familiar you are, but Greeley is along the Cache La Poudre, which is whenever it rains heavy in the mountains, the ash particulate gets in the water supply for Greeley, and then they have to shift to where they get their drinking water and everything else from. So it's there's a lot of other little minute things that are happening after the fact that are just huge for some of the cities, some of the businesses, that type of thing here in Colorado. But to circle back to the atmospheric river, we're hoping you guys bring us some snow from that. It looks like we might get it on Tuesday.
Well, so regardless of whether you get that or not, obviously this drought's not going anywhere in the West, in many parts of the West at least. Of course, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Park Williams' research saying that this drought is likely, this 22-year period drought since 2000 is likely the worst 22 period year drought in the last 1,200 years. These mega droughts. This one's starting out to be the worst. I say starting out because classically mega droughts can last 30, 40 plus years. Of course, we hope it doesn't, but it's possible that it could. And I think this is the perfect time to talk about 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes has a special on the Colorado River. So we're going to run that promotion for you. It's coming up this Sunday, and then we'll come out and talk about drought once we're done watching that.
These white bathtub rings, is this where the water used to be?
Absolutely.
Brad Udall, a climate scientist at Colorado State University, went out on Lake Powell with us.
So all of this would have been underwater?
Yeah.
So what does this tell you about what's happening on the Colorado River?
Well, it's a signal of the long-term problem we've been seeing since the year 2000, which is climate change is reducing the flows of the Colorado significantly.
Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the two biggest reservoirs in the country, were nearly full in 2000. Today, they are at just about 30% capacity.
The lake's now 155 feet below full. It's dropped something like 50 feet this year.
And it's still dropping.
Yes, and that's when power generation actually becomes to come into question.
It'll drop so low that it may not be able to
It
generate
may not be able to generate power.
hydroelectric power.
Yeah.
I mean, this is causing climate change is causing so many problems in the West. You know, there's some natural variability here. This drought, and Park Williams, again, his research says that about 50% of it is natural. 50% of it can be explained by human-caused climate change. Why? Mostly because it's warmer, and that's evaporating the moisture in the ground and evaporating the moisture in the rivers, and it is drying everything out. And it's not so much that there's less rain, but the rain is falling in quicker spurts. So we're not seeing it consistently throughout the year, or as consistently as we may have used to see it. Now it's happening all at once. That doesn't help. Plus, of course, there's less snow in the mountains often, less snow melt getting into the rivers. So, I can bring any one of you in to talk about water problems because it's happening all over the West. Dave, obviously, you must know Brad Udall very well. Because he's a very popular climate scientist there.
Yeah, and the Colorado, of course, starts here in Colorado and then moves out that way. And most of our reservoirs that are west of the divide are way below where they should be at this point of the year. At this point, and they've been that way for the last several seasons. We sometimes we get a good dump of snow and then they get back up there. But overall, the average reservoir height is down. It's kind of sad to see, like a lot of the reservoirs that are right along I-70. If you go off I-70, go up into the mountains, there's one little area called Lake Dillon, and that thing used to be full of water. Now you go by and same thing. You could see where the water used to be, where the little islands in the reservoir used to be. A lot of them were covered up, and now you can see them also. Just with one look at a lot of our waterways and that type of thing, you could see how significant the drought has changed. I know BJ, we had that drought map here, and I know a lot of our viewers sometimes just look at the state, but we wanted to show you kind of the whole West, and you can see all of the western half of the United States has some drought problems. California, most of your state is in the extreme to exceptional category, and Colorado kind of waffles back and forth depending upon how much rain or how much snow we get. But this is not just a problem that affects just you guys in California or us in Colorado. It's more than half of the nation feeling the effects of this drought, and that nothing is going to change anytime soon. The atmospheric river that you guys are talking about is going to come in, give you some flooding, give you some rain briefly, but we probably need like 10 of those spread out over several years to make even a dent. And even with that, we won't get out of the drought situation that a lot of us are in right now, right?
Can I put a number on that, actually, Dave? Because I did.
I was just guessing, but
No, 10 was a very good guess over the long term for the amount of years that we've built up the deficit. But if we could get 3 to 6 atmospheric rivers of the intensity that we've got now, we don't want like moderate ones. We need strong to exceptional, which is what the one coming in today is. That would make a sizable dent in the drought. And here's a positive spin on this. So Jeff's absolutely onto an important issue when it comes to the duration of the megadrought. And the conversation that's going to be spotlighted on 60 News is an important one to raise the awareness level of the reality of that. But hopefully not lost in that conversation, especially here in California, is our understanding of the dramatic swings we can go through on a dime. And they'll come in dramatic ways with what will seem like intensely wet winters or intensely wet storms like this. And if we go into it with our knowledge of what's ahead, of how it's likely going to go, the droughts are going to intensify, but the droughts are going to be punctuated by these extremes of intense rainfall on the other end of the spectrum, and everything we know from the climate research is telling us that's the way it's going to go. Now we can start planning for that. And one of the more optimistic outlooks here in California is the enormous amount of storage we have in our groundwater basins. And there's already discussions of how to start wisely soaking those basins when we get the huge flooding events, to start banking that water, not necessarily in that we want to fill our actual reservoirs, but the groundwater basins are going to be the untapped potential for us to start managing this in a better way. So today's atmospheric river may not be enough to do that because the ground is so dry, it's just going to get soaked into the soil. But if we get a couple more of these this winter or down the road, there are ways that we can be smart about how we manage this.
Julie, I want to ask you something, because I know it's happening in the valleys there, where the aquifer, the groundwater supply, is depleted. Some of the water that is being brought out of the ground is not necessarily the cleanest, purest water, right? Because they're going deeper and deeper. So people's water, there's a water quality problem there. And of course, then there's the added problem of farmers and people, in agriculture who need the water but may not be able to actually get it. And there's this battle between residents and agriculture in the West. Who wins those? It's complicated water laws that have been on the books for 100 years in the West. So you don't have to answer all those questions, but it would take forever. But I am curious about depletion of the aquifer, the groundwater supply, and if people are getting the water quality they need and deserve.
I mean, the short answer is no. I think that we probably know that in general. There's also the debate between Northern California and Southern California. Northern California water is being sent south. And then there's, that just adds to the debate over where this water goes. The issue is when we get a dumping like we are expecting to get over the next couple of days, we can't hold on about water. We end up being water going. Essentially, it's wasted. And they are, as Darren brought up, we are coming up with new ideas and new ways to be able to hold on to more of that water. But unfortunately, it doesn't do a whole lot. We won't necessarily hold on to all of that towards the end of the season. The other thing I wanted to touch upon, specific to the rain that we're getting right now, and even this atmospheric river, is our infrastructure. Not just here, but I was in the Bay Area. I was actually at K-Pix for a decade and grew up in the Bay Area. We don't have the infrastructure to handle a whole lot of rain all at once. So obviously what you want is a little bit of rain spread out over a long period of time. When we get dumped on like this, especially after a long period of drought, you start to see pipes break. I covered a major issue in Capitola near Santa Cruz back in 2011, where they had one primary pipe coming through the city, and they got so much rain in one day, it wouldn't have flooded were it not for that pipe failure. And then circling back to the insurance issue, because it was a pipe, the insurance companies wouldn't cover it because they said it wasn't an act of God, it was infrastructure. So, there are all of these additional issues that happen. And I suspect we probably will see some significant localized flooding due to infrastructure problems because of all the rain we're about to get. But one more thing back to just sort of the drought and circling back to fire on that. It was that drought between 2011 and 2015 that really decimated our forests. And they were susceptible to disease. A lot of them never recovered. And so because of the drought, then even, we're still feeling the effects, the wildfires now, because you've got all of this dry tinder, essentially. You have all this fuel for these fires. And if you look at the 30-year normals over the past decade, all California stations except Eureka show a drop in their 30-year normals averaging 5%. So this isn't just happened over the last 5 years, even though that's when we're seeing the most significant fires. This is the drought having an impact over 30 years, and now it's sort of culminating.
And of course, drought begets drought. The more drought you have, the more drought you're going to have, because there's less moisture in the soil to evaporate. And also the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So in the West, keeps drying out. Whatever evaporates ends up in the jet stream and probably dumps on the eastern half of the country that has too much water, because we've seen extreme rain events, snow events, but mostly rain events in the Northeast increase by over 50%. And by the way, I think I just want to mention two things real quick. So the big flood in New York City, related to Hurricane Ida, that was a once in 1,000 year event in New York City. And then the Pacific Northwest heat wave this summer, and I know all of you will agree with me, I don't think we could have confidently said that could ever happen in Portland, in British Columbia. that we could see temperatures 115 to 120 degrees. At least that's my opinion. Would you have thought that those kind of numbers were even possible? I'm just asking.
Well, I actually would like to answer that directly, because that particular heat wave, Jeff, before it centered on the Pacific Northwest and shattered records, about 9 days before that heat wave, the long-range models that we all look at had the center of that intense heat dome over Northern California. So this is a week and a half out. And all of us in the meteorology and climate community here, we're looking at the numbers of 124, 121 for places like Sacramento and saying, the models there's a kink, there's something wrong. Let's give this some time to play out. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that changed was the model didn't work out a kink. It changed the location of that heat dome, and it centered it over the Pacific Northwest. So that was a story that was incredibly close to home here, even though we didn't experience it. And no, to answer your question, we didn't believe it. And thankfully, we didn't have to experience it, but Portland did.
We were taught in meteorology school not to ever forecast records. I would say it's time to change that. Because the impossible is now not just becoming possible, it's becoming probable because of climate change. So I want to transition in a minute or two to optimism. Why should we be optimistic? But before I do so, I just want to ask for any last words from you about the droughts, the fires, the atmospheric rivers.
I would be, just before we start wrapping up here, just give kudos to like the Forest Service people, the firefighters, and that type of thing. Like the Forest Service people here, I mentioned we have a show coming up on our air, but one of the things that they've been doing in one of the interviews that's in the show is we had that big Cameron Peak, which was our largest ever, which is close to Rocky Mountain National Park. And one of the Forest Service people said, we've been fighting this fire, which happened in 2020, for the last 20 years. They started in that area after the Hayman fire, which was in 2002, of changing the way they're managing the forest and doing things. And they had been thinning things out and doing that since 2002 up there. And they do say that they made pockets. They didn't get rid of all of the fuel up there, but they made pockets that slowed down the fire. It still became the biggest one we ever had, but they do say they slowed down the burning of the fire in the park. Because they have been working for the last 20 years on doing something like that. So it's not like we're getting all these fires and all of a sudden nobody's doing anything. These guys are working hard out there and trying to get things done. They're in Colorado. They're thinning the forest, brush and that type of thing, and trying to alleviate the fuel that's there. And they've been doing it for several years. It's not like they're all of a sudden, hey, we better do something about this. They've been working on it for a while, but it's such a big problem. There's a lot that has to be done and a lot of money that has to go into getting things done too. So kudos to all those people.
Yeah. And increasingly, we're hearing them all say, we've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
They're all
doing stories like in the early 2000s. And all the experts were saying, we're going to have more fires. It's good. They're going to break through some of the biggest fires ever. It's on the way. And we're right in the middle of that right now. So it's here and there's even more to be done. Right.
And I would add that is sort of part of the optimism, at least here. I've spent a lot of time covering this year, especially covering CAL FIRE and the Forest Service. And, the governor just signed an agreement here in California committing to treating a combined 1 million acres of forest land each year by 2025. And by treating, it's what you're talking about. It's forest thinning, it's backburns, it's protecting communities. And, by that rationale, with the fires that we just saw, the Caldor fire specifically, they did an incredible job. Firefighters, CAL FIRE did an incredible job protecting Lake Tahoe communities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when it really hit home. Initially, it was burning in a populated area. Actually, my in-laws' home was in the area that was shut down. We were in the middle of selling their house when the fire happened. But there were homes burning. There was massive acreage burning, and as it moved up the hill, it was incredible to watch these firefighters save these homes, save, frankly, these communities in and around Lake Tahoe. And now that we're hopefully getting an end to fire season, I mean, we're about to see Santa Ana season, we're about to see the Diablo wind season, so we might still see fires depending on how much rain we get out of the system. But fingers crossed, fire season is over. This is the time of year when CAL FIRE and the Forest Service can go in and start doing that clearing in those back burns. And I feel like for me, that's the optimism. We know how to treat it. It's just a matter of getting it done.
So why don't I just start there, where you just left off, which is, okay, each and every one of you, I want to know what you're optimistic about when it comes to, obviously, we're talking about, extreme weather, and we're talking about economic impact, and we're talking about impact to human health. But why are you optimistic? I guess I'll start from the top, Dave, and make our way down.
I think unfortunately, and we off the air had briefly talked about this. Unfortunately, the only way to get more people on board with changing things and going in the right direction is we have to have more fires, more bad things happen, and that type of thing to get their attention and say, hey, and I think that's happening. I think we're nearing the point where, especially like with the fires, that finally, hey, these fires are happening. Here's your proof. Things are heating up. Things are drying out. Things are changing. What are you going to do? So I think more and more people are getting on board with changing things. I think, Jeff, you had mentioned there was a study this summer with all the heat and all the fires and everything that a certain percentage had changed their mind, right?
Yeah, George Mason and Yale, they did a study. They did one in March. They did another one in like August. And because of all the extreme weather during the summer, the Pacific Northwest heat wave, the European floods, what happened in New York City. And I'm not sure actually New York City was part of that, but there was a lot of extreme weather, just a tremendous amount this summer. There was about a 10% increase in people's concern about climate change. A full 10%. That's a lot.
That's huge.
In just a few months. Yeah.
Well, and unfortunately, that's what happens to happen. We got to have more of these, and we're changing minds. And I think, as you said, that's happening. We're getting a little bit at a time, and a little bit's better than nothing at all, right?
So, Julie, how about you?
I think I'm most optimistic in just that we've learned a lot, and we now have programs in place. We have plans in place to help reduce, specifically when it comes to fires, the fire damage, when it comes to the people element, the kids dealing with the smoke, when it comes to policies in place to help preserve water, as Darren pointed out. We're learning. And so while we may not be able to change the climate or stop climate change, at least we are learning how to slow it down, prevent it, or deal with repercussions.
You're talking about adaptation, and yes, there's lots of money out there for that, and we have to spend money there. Where we're lacking is mitigation, is trying to slow down the amount of emissions and slow down climate change before it gets past a certain point, and that we're not very good at yet.
Yeah.
But Amber, let me bring you in on this. California is such a progressive state when it comes to fighting climate change.
All right,
you guys are ahead of the curve, so let's talk about
Yeah, so I want to piggyback on what Dave's saying, for more bad things to happen, for more people to really realize what's happening. And remember, as things get warmer and warmer and climate change increases, the number one killer in...
I think we lost Amber. We'll give her a couple of seconds.
However, I am optimistic. Oh, okay. However, I am optimistic that because we're learning more and more, knowledge is power. These fire crews are really improving in how they try and get these wildfires, just nip it in the bud right away as soon as they break out here in Southern California, especially our fire crews here. They are such hard workers, and they are hats off to them always. Whenever we talk about these wildfires, a lot of them, 1-2 acres, they're done. But, as they get bigger and bigger, that causes a little bit more of a problem. But I know that our fire crews are way ahead of the game.
How about you, Darren?
Probably the thing that gives me the most hope is our ability to communicate clearly to people that as dire as things look now when you see the headlines, if we shift our focus a little bit and recognize we know how far we've pushed this system, we also recognize if we can start making the changes that are within our means and adjust to some of the changes we've already seen, it is still entirely possible to slow this process down and eventually start leveling it off. I think that really needs to be our focus. We have already changed the climate. If we did nothing, we would change it to a point where this tenuous, wonderful climate that we've been able to develop a civilization in over the last, several thousand years isn't going to be recognizable. But we're not there yet.
Right.
And everything the science is telling us is, all right, we know where we've pushed it. We know where it's likely going to go. And we can see if we can get motivated. There's still time to move this in the right direction. I think enough personal experience for people. I think so many people are already on board with this idea. I think we've got a fractured political system right now that's incapable of moving as fast as we'd all like it to in the scientific community. But let's not overlook the fact that we've got enough solid science that's inspirational in terms of our ability to understand how we can move forward with this. We have the tools and the answers to do it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's exactly how I feel. This is not a terminal disease if we don't want it to be. We know what's causing it. We know how to stop it. We have the solutions to stop it. That's why I'm optimistic. And also economically, solar, wind, which would not have worked 20 years ago because it cost too much money, now costs less in many cases than fossil fuels. And once economics takes over, things change very quickly. So for me, and one more thing, we have to prepare for our children and our children's children. So generations going forward, these children understand climate change and they're taking the bull by the horns. And knowing that our children are going to be suffering from this in the future, hopefully will motivate us. So I think there are big reasons to be optimistic. Oh, and by the way, this could be another big jolt to our economy in America going forward. This essentially industrial revolution that needs to happen in order to transition us from, fossil fuels over to new energy. So, with that said, we basically have run out of time. Any last words here on the panel?
Let's keep the conversation going.
We will.
This is fantastic.
We will. I think, we're going to do these on a consistent basis because this has been great. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. What an incredibly talented panel that we have. This was called Wildfires and Wild Weather, the Effects of Climate Change in the West. And I'm sure we'll be doing this again very soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff.